Hey folks, we're going to do a little trio for the quadratus lumborum here in this practice video. The quadratus lumborum, or the QL, is a muscle that's located in our low back and can sometimes be implicated in low back discomfort and the things that we typically encounter when we sit for long periods. So we're going to do a little manual release, a stretch, and then a little activation so that we can help to improve how that muscle is functioning and moving. You may need a block. You'll need your manual release tool, so some kind of ball, and then a bolster or something that you can prop yourself up on. To begin with our release, you're going to need to come down onto your side to start with. Now, for our location of the QL, we're looking at between the lowest ribs and the top of the hip and the spine. So it's kind of like in that low back window. And the two locations that we're going to apply pressure to here, one is just above the hip. So if you palpate the hip bone or the ilium, you'll be working just superior to that with one of your points. And the other one will be just inferior, just below the lowest ribs, okay? And you'll sort of be aiming for somewhere in the middle, halfway between the edge of your body and the spine, about halfway in there, okay? You may need a block to prop up the ball with. However, to begin with, in case you don't need that, place the ball underneath you towards your back, and we're going to roll back slowly onto it. As you do that, we're going to position the ball close to the ribs to start with. So try to find the ribs with your pressure. Work the ball back slowly towards the spine, but never getting to the spine. And then when you find a spot, stay there. Now, if you are finding that the pressure is not enough, or it's hard for you to feel that spot, that's where you would introduce the block underneath the ball as well. You could also bend the knees, both knees in, and that will sort of push the low back down a little bit, okay? So you can give that a try. The idea is to find a spot where you feel a decent amount of sensation, applying a pressure that you can maintain and you can breathe into comfortably. Just like with any of our manual release practices here, when we find a spot, we stay there. We're not moving around, we're not trying to agitate the spot, we're not trying to roll around on it, we find the spot and we sink in. So take your breaths here in and out through the nose. Seeing if you can incrementally sort of let yourself rest a little bit more into that pressure. And then we're looking, again, just like all of our other manual release practices, we're looking for some kind of change in that sensation. Usually it'll be a lessening of sensation, but not necessarily always. And that's our signal to move on from that spot for today, or for this particular practice. To move to the next spot, you can either roll back onto your side and reposition and move the ball more inferiorly, so you're getting just above the hip for our second spot, or if you roll onto your back a little bit further, you can lessen the pressure, roll the ball down so that you're just above the hip. You're getting really close to the hip, in fact. And then you're going to work and explore medially and laterally. So you're going to work the ball towards the spine, note how that feels, and then work it away from the spine. And as you do that along the ridge of the pelvis, you may notice that there's a couple of points, maybe 1 point or 2 points, that have a little bit more intensity. And so you would find one of those and pause there. Same variations with the legs. You may decide to bring one knee in towards your chest. That typically adds a little bit more pressure. Or you might have the block underneath there as well to give you a little bit more. Okay? Same deal. When you find the spot, pause there, sink in, and just breathe. In this practice, we're just going to do 2 points per side. However, if this is an area of your body that you feel could use more attention, this particular muscle perhaps is a little bit more upset for you, then stay a little bit longer, explore around and see if you can find a couple more spots, and then rejoin after you've done those spots, okay? Otherwise, when you feel that change in this spot, this second spot that you're on, then we're going to move to the other side. So release that work. I'm just going to do a little flip. All you need to do is just do a little roll over. Come onto your other side. And again, we're going to start with the release ball closer to the ribs. So position it so that it's maybe even touching the ribs. And then you can work it, you can just sort of move your body over the top of it so that the ball comes just inferior to those ribs. And then, as you move around, bring the ball a little bit closer towards the spine. And you may notice that as you do that, there's a spot that speaks a little bit louder to you. When you find that spot, pause there. And give yourself some time. One of the reasons that our QL tends to get a little bit upset is because it's sort of it is one of the muscles that brings extension into the lumbar spine, but its primary role is actually lateral flexion. And so number one, we don't move our spine through a lot of lateral flexion in our everyday activities. And two, it can help out with lumbar extension, which is one of the essential components to remaining seated or staying upright when you're seated. And so even when you have a slouching posture, for example, your QL is having to do some work to keep you upright, and it does it without the support in that situation. When you're slouching, it does it without the support of the primary muscles, the erector spinae muscles, that are supposed to be keeping you seated upright in that scenario. And so it's trying to do more work than it really should do in that action. And so those couple of things tend to mean that the QL is a little bit upset for the majority of us. And so a little bit of TLC is sometimes in order. when you do feel that first spot change, that's when you can come off and move the ball down, or you can just release that pressure by rolling the other direction, and then you can slowly move along so that the ball comes down towards the pelvis. And just superior to that pelvic ridge, we can move the ball medially and laterally to search for another spot. And when you find that spot, you can pause there, taking some breaths. And again, just like on the other side, if there were more spots that you went ahead and explored and spend some time there, you might want to do the same sort of arrangement on this side. Keep exploring, see what else you can find. Or, if you're ready to move on to part number 2, our stretch, then we'll slowly come off our release tool and come up to a seat. In your seated position, have one leg bent and folded in towards your groin and the other leg out straight. And what we're going to do is we're just going to start by pressing that bent leg down and tipping our torso towards the straight leg. So push down with your hands, maybe one hand could be enough, and tip your torso towards the straight leg. This is sort of easing yourself into it. You may find that this is giving you plenty of sensation here in the QL. If, as you do this, if there's more potential space to move into, that might be where you reach your other hand towards the foot of the straight leg. It may be where you also reach the hand that's pushing the leg down, instead reach it over towards the foot as well. When you find an adequate degree of sensation for your stretch today, just pause there. There's no need to make it super intense, because what we're going to do is going to stay here for a minute or two. And when we stay in a stretch for that period of time, we don't want to start it out as being so intense, because the intensity is going to increase the longer we stay here. So find an adequate amount of stretch without it being too intense and stay there. And if it does get too intense as we remain here for longer, then reverse out a little bit, okay? So taking some breaths here, wherever here is. And paying attention to the sensation that you experience here in the low back, you may notice that as it increases in intensity, you might also notice that there's perhaps a little bit more space. And so you have the option to sort of move into that space if you feel like that's going to be a good experience, or you can stay still. There's no requirement to move into that space. Just a couple more breaths here. And before you move out, my recommendation is to sort of tip the torso forward a little bit first, tip that top shoulder forward, and sort of circle your way up, because it can be quite an intense experience to just flat out release that stretch, okay? And so that sort of eases you out of it. Head to the other side. And then use your hands, both or one, to push that leg down, push the bent leg down, and tip your torso towards the straight leg. You again have additional options to reach hands towards the straight leg foot. Finding where this side feels like an adequate degree of sensation, and pausing there. Taking some time to just breathe in and out through the nose. Again, remembering that as we stay here and the intensity tends to increase, you also can reverse out of your position a little bit if it's too much sensation. One of the gauges for that is your breath. So if you notice that your breathing becomes short and shallow, or if you're sort of holding it a little bit because of the intensity, then that's a good sign to just sort of reverse out a little bit. It's more beneficial if we are able to find a sense of ease in that intensity, and if we can't find that sense of ease, then it's best that we reverse out just a little bit until we can find that sense of ease. Because one of the things we're doing whenever we stretch or we provide that type of a sensation to our body, one of the things we're doing is we're trying to train our nervous system to recognize this position or this range as okay. And if we're experiencing too much sensation, we're not training the nervous system that it's okay. We're actually training the nervous system that it's not okay. And so we're going to be unlikely to be able to use that range of motion when we return to something like that. Taking a few more breaths here. And then to release, remember to tip that top shoulder towards the floor and sort of just roll out of your stretch there. Then for our final piece of our trio is a little activation for the QL. So when we release a muscle, if we're trying to increase its function or enhance its function, it's a good idea to do a little activation afterwards. This is nothing too strenuous because we've taken the tissues to their fullest length for today. We're just going to make it something a little bit lighter. So position your bolster underneath your side And we're going to be trying to contract this top side so that we come up and away from the floor. Now just be sure that your arm is either resting on the floor, or if it's pushing down into the ground to help you, just float it away from the ground, okay? So we're going to do that just a handful of times, lifting the torso up, but thinking about lifting from the effort in the low back. We could produce effort higher up in the spine to lift us up, but the idea is we want to try and get some action of the QL. So think about contracting the lower portion of the spine here in lateral flexion and lifting up a little bit. Just a couple more. And then we'll do a little switch for the sides. You could roll over, keep the bolster where it is. I have to do a little bit of a dance to the other side. Come on down. And again, find that lift, thinking about drawing the effort from the lumbar region to get that lift. If you notice that your arms are pushing into the ground to help you lift, just float them away from the floor. A handful of these, and that'll be a nice little recipe for helping our QL feel a little bit more taken care of. 3 more of these. Lift up. Last one. And there you have it. There's a little trio for our quadratus lumborum. If you find that that gives you a particularly high degree of relief for your day, it might be something that you might want to return to a few times this week and also incorporate into your following weeks if you find a lot of benefit from it. If you have any questions, please reach out. Otherwise, thanks for joining me here in this practice, and I do look forward to seeing you again very soon.